Well, yes, indeed. Focusing on our next item now. Remember, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, did issue some warning to politicians, saying, slam the brakes, hold back, don't contravene the Electoral Act by embarking on any such campaign, subtle, covertly, overtly, or else they will have to face the music. And that's what we're talking about now, as Chimanachi joins us this morning. He's a lawyer, and as he always likes to introduce himself as a professional in politics. Morning, and thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning, and good morning, viewers.
Well, we also did have reactions from some politicians about that. They simply just said, look, INEC, why are you beating about the bush? But we'll focus on that in just a moment. But perhaps let's get a comment or two from Mr. Chimanachi before we go for the headline news. But when you heard that comment, were you in any way surprised, or you thought, what were your reactions, first of all?
About the
warning that INEC issued to politicians, no campaign whatsoever. It's not time yet.
No campaign in the sense of openly canvassing. There will always be subtle political moves, arrangements, organizations, reorganizations, and so on and so forth. But to the way we are going about it, especially Nigerian politicians, many of whom have no other job than bickering. And what they call politics in Nigeria, bickering is what they call politics. Because it is your nuisance value, that actually the quotient of your nuisance value actually determines what office you are catapulted to.
How do you mean?
Yes, you see that the more noise you make, if you look at the comments and all the political shenanigans going on, none of them bothers on cerebral content. They don't have so much of intellectual input. It's pedestrian. I deal with you, or I corner you, I kill you, I beat you up, I upstage you. Somebody someday here was talking about concentric circle. It's not so much that case, really, because politics is about who gets what, when, and how. It is your understanding that makes it a bickering or a conflict. But because there is a body like INEC, it tries to make that conflict within consensus. That has to be done by certain rules. Okay? There will always be attempts by people to get something that they are not even entitled to. Because we call it politics even when there is no conscience. Politics doesn't mean lack of conscience. And that brings me, perhaps maybe in the course of discussion, if we can, we don't have a culture of political education, where you now have a process of socialization within the political culture and conscientization at the margin or fringe of it.
So, when you talk about political education, you have those who will always, of course, different sorts of political education, but perhaps just explain a little further on that. From the classical theory of education, not just talking about politics. Politics happens to be just a subject in this instance under the broad gamut of what you call education. Education is like a gamut. It's a process. It starts from pedagogy to andragogy. That means it's a lifelong process because you can never stop learning. And learning can take place in a formal or an informal setting. That is where pedagogy is the one that you program for when you are young and impressionable. People do use psychology, educational psychology, and things to mold your mind, mold your character. So when you graduate, they say your content is both in learning and in character. Although we have removed character, even learning is vitiated. That's why you have violence among even the people who boast they have certificates. Now, the andragogy aspect of it is that when you didn't even have the opportunity of going to school formally, there are programs. We have adult education. It can take place in the classroom, whereby even if you didn't do primary school, you can learn how to write. It can take place. We know many chief executives in this country who hired some qualified people to teach them in-house. And they are now able to read because their job requires that they must address a gathering.
but they didn't have the opportunity some people had to have gone to formal school. So they come out well. Now, in this political setting, therefore, we don't have any institution. Those ones that we have some institutions labeled as democratic institutes. The products, many of us, we do not know how they impact. But we need an informal process of political education, such that the models, because education gravitates around models, models provide opportunity for quick learning. Who are you going to model? Who is that role model in politics? Take the case of the time of Zeke, Awo, and Mbadiwa and so on. People wanted to hear them talk. The flower of language.
Yeah, but that's because these chaps already had formed their character from the larger society and brought it into politics.
That is the issue. If you see, it's like the chicken and egg. How did the education start? Did the thing drop from heaven? Somebody got educated, some from their own effort. Many of the philosophers of the old did not attend universities. And yet today, even their religious ideas, people killed for that. Without looking at, these guys sat down to think. There is no cerebral content in our politics. That's why we are always, pedestrian. Some of them, when you talk about political gerrymandering, histrionics and things like that, these are concepts by people who understand the content of politics and are able to manipulate it in an intellectual manner without hitting the polity.
Some people say that, some of the things that you've just talked, especially when you talk about modeling, is where the godfather, godson relationship, which has been corrupted in Nigeria, come in, where the godfather looks around for the person who can actually stand up to be a political leader, and through some act is actually grooming that particular person for a day, when the person will become a leader in his or her own right. Do you think that we can ever come back to that process, or rechristen the word Godfather?
There is nothing wrong with the word Godfather. Even in baptism, you always have a Godfather, even in the church. Somebody who mentor you, who will shepherd you, because the presumption is that the Godfather himself has been socialized within a cultural content or context. You understand? So it's a question of transferring, a transfer of learning. Okay? The man has been there. Those who want to go to the market must pass through the same gate. So those who pass before them will tell them there's riot at the gate, don't come. That's what the Godfather will tell you. Don't pass this way, there's trouble. Come this way at this time. You understand what I mean? It's in simple language. But when the Godfather himself needs to be socialized, then what can he pass on? He will pass on the whims. He will pass on his caprices. You understand? So what you find that in Nigerian politics is that the Godfathers, many of them, are not even confident in themselves because they know they lack content. So they look for those people at the lower ebb of the society who are prone to violence and who can trade in violence. I don't know whether you get the point.
Was it always like this?
It was not always like this because the man at the helm himself had been thoroughly schooled. Take the time of Zeke and Awo and so on.
But I thought, sorry to cut you there,
yes.
I thought it has always been like this because even at that time, we remembered how they burnt a whole lot of places. You remember what they refer to as the Wild Wild West. And those were also politicians.
They were not the common scenarios. Something snapped and something happened. Remember that in an organized polity, it does not necessarily mean that you don't have the wayward ones or those who are prone to that. The fireman is always unhappy when there is no fire. I don't know whether I get one. If you employ a manager in charge of fire, and for 10 years there's no fire, ordinarily some people would think that the man has no job. It may have been that he himself has been trying very hard to prevent the fire. I don't know what I get. But for the people outside, this guy has no job, fire him. So to be relevant, sometimes he puts more fire in a rickety car outside. So he puts it, to show that if the edifice was on fire, this is what he could have done. These are things that happen in politics. Okay? Sometimes you have some people who have hirelings. when they have nothing to do, they go and fight in the name of the man that they are supporting him. But it behoves the man in whose name you are fighting to say, I am not violent.
Sorry, let me link it with what has been happening to the extent that INEC has come up. You know, once we started talking about this, we've even had it then last year in the studios. We had to talk about the early talk about 2015 by politicians. And people woke up someday and they started seeing different kinds of posters in the FCT and in different areas. But what we finally got from some of these people whose pictures were on those posters were statements like, not from me, we don't know who were actually responsible. Is it the same analogy you're trying to paint, that sometimes they go on behalf of these people without taking instruction from them? They go out and put such or
remember,
make such
your
comments?
followers sometimes will look at your body language. Let's take the classical case of Boko Haram. Boko Haram, they say it's a faceless group, but we see the outcome of their activities. Some people are happy with what they are doing. May not be happy that they are killing people, but they are happy that they are destabilizing the government in power, even if it is affecting the citizens, hoping that perhaps the citizens will now say the government is not working. Okay? Some people are against it and they are vociferous about it. In the instance that you find that your Oga, quote and unquote, likes violence, but he wants to paint a cherubic picture of a man who loves peace, you can do things in his name and come back for reward, surreptitiously. It happens in politics. The interpretation of the posters you see could be two ways. Somebody could be testing the waters. The man whose picture is there may have instigated it. Test the reaction of people, like flying a kite. If it were this way, let's see how it could have been.
Test the waters in which way? To see if INEC will respond? Or to
not necessarily INEC. See what people will say about me. INEC is only there to say, put it out when it has been put in. you get the point. Now, it is also possible that people say, okay, because we know there is a rule against this, put this man on the spot so that you will present him as the man who is breaking the rule. All these are possibilities. And in Nigerian politics, anything can happen. Because so many people in the system who are running around in politics have no job. Ordinarily. They don't. And they have no, so many. And they don't have a profession to run back to. So when there is no politics and politicking the Nigerian way, they are jobless.
Yeah, but isn't that because of the way it is structured? Because take, for instance, the National Assembly, where lots of people have suggested, why don't you make this on a part-time basis so that people can actually have something, a profession or something to fall back on, and don't take this as the daily source of livelihood?
That is the ideal thing. But when the people who will make the law are the ones you are asking to make it, and they look at the law that it is not going to be beneficial, how would you want to deliberately shoot yourself on the foot?
Does it mean they're making laws for themselves?
Well, in Nigerian situation, we are very unfortunate. It doesn't have to do with the National Assembly alone. Those in power are too myopic. That is why most of the time when they come out from power, they regret a lot of things they did or they didn't or couldn't do. They begin to even suggest in the pages of newspapers how things could be done. Something that is so diametrically opposed to the position they had taken in the past.
Is that also part of politics? Because now I think
it's not part of politics the normal way, but it's part of Nigerian politics because there's no preparation. There's no preparation. Look at how Obama emerged. Was it by accident? The guy had a power of elocution. He had prepared himself from childhood that he was going to be president of America. Whether it was going to materialize or not is not the issue. But he typed himself against a model whom he always referred to, that he was his model. You understand? So the preparation was there both at his personal level and at a formal level. He went to law school. because his model himself was also a lawyer. You understand what I mean? Then he had seen the content of what probably had made the man what he was, and then he came out again and saw the context, because the context of that man had changed. But he was able to use the content to influence the context or adapt to it. So, most of the time people talked down at him, but you could not ignore his presence. But in Nigeria, if you don't, you see, when the head fails, the hand takes over. If you fail to reason with me, then you fight me. You say that I'm dictatorial, instead of going for the power of argument, which of course would deploy logic. Many a time, I have some respect for Awo. People said he was very dictatorial. But like Awo himself said that most of his friends and peers, while he burnt the candle in the night, trying to understand how things were, they were partying and drinking in a lascivious manner with women. I mean that may not necessarily be a bad thing, but something must give. You understand what I mean? If I spent more time to study, I should get better grade, isn't it? So when the man now came, they say he's a sage, some people say he's a